episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show with another truly fascinating guest helping to create a better tomorrow for all of us on many different fronts. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Irakli Beridze, who is the head of the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Robotics at the United Nations Interregional Crime and Justice Research Institute, or UNICRI, located in The Hague. With a master's degree in international relations and national security studies, as well as a degree in law. Mr. Beridze has more than 20 years experience in leading multilateral negotiations, developing various stakeholder engagement programs with governments, other UN agencies, international organizations, the private sector, think tanks, and so forth. And he advises governments and international organizations on numerous issues related to international security, scientific and technological developments, emerging technologies, innovation, and disruptive potential of new technologies, particularly on the issues of crime prevention, criminal justice and security, and how he's actively involved in focusing on supporting governments worldwide on the strategies, action plans, roadmaps, and policy papers on the topics of artificial intelligence and robotics. Since 2014, Ms. Beridze has initiated and managed one of the first United Nations programs on artificial intelligence, initiating and organizing a number of high-level events at the UN General Assembly and other international organizations, finding synergies with traditional threats and risks, as well as identifying various solutions that AI can contribute to for the achievement of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. Beridze is a member of various international task forces, including the World Economic Forum's Global Artificial Intelligence Council, the UN High-Level Panel for Digital Cooperation, and the High-Level Expert Group on Artificial Intelligence of the European Commission. He frequently lectures and speaks on subjects related to technological development, exponential technologies, AI and robotics, and international security, and his numerous publications in international journals and magazines. Frequently is quoted in the media. He is also an international gender champion, supporting the IGC Panel Parity Pledge. Prior to joining UNICRI, he served as a special projects officer for the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, undertaking extensive missions in politically sensitive areas around the globe, and contributed to global anti-terrorism efforts to fight against chemical terrorism, and was a recipient of recognition on the awarding of the Nobel Peace Prize to the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Welcome, Irakli Beridze, to the show.
Thank you very much, Ira. It is my pleasure to be with you today.
It's great having you. I'd really love to start off, as we typically do, by handing you the floor, just to sort of further introduce yourself. If you could tell us a little bit more about your story, everything from where you grew up, how you got interested in the law, how you got interested in international relations and security, and ultimately how you were attracted into this fascinating domain of transnational issues.
Thank you, Ira. Once again, it's a pleasure to be at your show and share some of my experiences, some of the thoughts, and some of these topics, which is shaping our presence right now, and certainly going to shape our future, and going to shape our future immediately and in the long-term perspective as well. Well, I grew up in Georgia, not in the state, but in the country of Georgia, which was part of Soviet Union at that time. And when I was born, and soon after breaking up of the Soviet Union, I lived through the couple of civil wars in Georgia, started working with the United Nations, even when I was 17, 18 years old, working for the World Food Program and basically delivering food-related projects during the civil war in Georgia, what was taking place in early 90s. And later on, I sort of went on studying in the law school in Georgia, which I graduated and went to study in the United States, studied in Finland, studied in a few other places as well, and joined international organizations back in year 2000 in the area of disarmament, non-proliferation, where I worked for quite a sort of a portion of my career as well.
take us, if you would, into before we get into some of the topics of AI and robotics and where we're going to go with this. I'd love if you could talk just for a couple of minutes about your previous work at the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, because here we have another sort of very terrifying topic, let's say, which there's not many other things as terrifying. And there will be, well, we'll talk a little about some of the parallels when people talk about some of the non-state actors that may use things like AI and robotics in a bad way in the future. But just talk through a little bit of your time spent on that issue and how it sort of informs some of what you're going to be looking for in this current role.
Oh, it's a great question, Ira. I mean, Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons is quite a unique international organization, and I can tell you why it is unique and what really fascinated me working there and what sort of working environment it was. It is probably the only functional international mechanism which aims to eradicate entire category of the weapon of mass destruction, right? We have number of weapons of mass destruction, and one of them is chemical weapons. And within the domain of chemical weapons, we have a treaty which is called Chemical Weapons Convention. And it's a global treaty where you have almost all countries part of the treaty, all countries pledging to eradicate existing stockpiles and never ever to make new stockpiles. And we don't have any of that in other categories of the weapons of mass destruction. We don't have anything like that in the nuclear weapons, bioweapons, or anything else. So in the chemical weapons domain, we have a treaty, and we also have an international organization which oversees the implementation of this treaty. So what makes this really fascinating is that you have a functional body with over 500 people working, which are ensuring that this treaty is implemented, which are ensuring that countries who pledge to destroy chemical weapons are doing so, and countries who pledge never ever to make them are also adhering to. So my role there was, I was working in various functions in management and other issues related to counterterrorism, for example, or the chemical related terrorism, like what you mentioned, non-state actors and other things. And truly fascinating experience was that organization managed to verifiably destroy almost 98 or 99% of the existing global stockpiles. And that's quite an achievement, because if not that movement, if not that effort, right now we would be living in a world where we would have something like over 100 metric tons of chemical weapons still existing, still in the possession of the countries.
Fascinating, really fascinating. So I'm sitting here in Philadelphia, the East Coast of the United States. Obviously up the road is New York, and like most Americans, I'm familiar with the UN building, and I'll see some stuff on the General Assembly on TV once in a while, but I have a very sort of cursory understanding of everything else that goes on at the UN. You are at the United Nations Interregional Crime and Justice Center, and then your domain, the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Robotics, is within that. I was wondering if you could sort of just walk us through where you are, sort of the genesis of the development of this new initiative, and then sort of who your, let's say, customers are within the UN, where you get your sort of, how you decide on a day-to-day basis what to focus on. Walk us through a little bit of that, if you would.
Right. I think, Ira, I mean, United Nations is a big organization. Obviously, the main headquarters are in New York, and a lot of agencies, including the permanent representations to the sort of headquarters of the United Nations, are located in New York. At the same time, UN has many other specialized agencies or sort of other UN bodies which are located in different locations. For example, in Geneva, there is a big UN presence. In Vienna, there is a big UN presence. Also, there's quite a sizable UN presence here in The Hague as well, where I'm located. Also in other locations like in Nairobi and in other sort of capitals like Turin in Italy, for example, which is hosting the UNICRI, United Nations Interregional Crime and Justice Research Institute. And that's the sort of a UN body which is mandated by the UN member states to support countries in respect to the questions related to crime prevention, criminal justice, rule of law, human rights associated to these issues, sort of to better equip UN member states to be prepared to ensure that they have a good criminal justice system, fair, in compliance with the fundamental principles of human rights. Countries are equipped with the capacity to fight crime and to have cutting edge and latest understanding and knowledge how to do so. So what we are doing actually is that we are conducting numerous trainings, numerous research, action-oriented research, capacity building projects, and many other initiatives which basically helps countries. So who our customers are? Our customers are United Nations member states, all 193 of them, and we are supporting their efforts. Now, the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Robotics, which is within the UNICRI, is a sort of a child of the, or a result of the actions and initiatives which we started to take back from 2014-15, when we realized that a technology like artificial intelligence is going to have a significant impact on our daily lives now, and accelerated or exponential impact in the future as well. So what we started to do is that actually I was an initiator of this project, and later on this project translated into creation of a specialized center, which now is hosted here in the City of Peace, Justice and Innovation, The Hague. And the center is mandated to, again, support the United Nations member states in the cutting edge understanding of how these technologies can be used both for good or for bad. So on the good side, we are examining how it can assist law enforcement agencies and security agencies and the countries to use this technology to fight crime-related problems, to solve crime-related problems, to solve problems which are associated to finding the solutions of specific crime-related domains, whether it's physical, whether it's digital, political, or others, threats related. Or at the same time, we are trying to understand how these technologies can be maliciously used by criminals or terrorists. And with that, we're partnering with big organizations like Interpol, Europol, United Nations Office of Counterterrorism, because we work quite a lot in that domain as well. So I have quite a lot on my plate on a daily basis, and quite a large clientele, put it this way, 193 countries.
Outstanding, outstanding. And as you interface with all these clients, obviously your portfolio is broad. We've talked about AI on the show in the past, primarily academia and a little bit in the private sector. Talk about some of the major trends that you focus on in terms of the non-government organizations, in terms of government. What are some of the big picture things that you're sort of the top of line for you in terms of the trends?
Sure. I mean, look, let's look at what happened, how sort of our lives really transformed within last 5-7 years or 10 years time, right? The topic of AI from the domain of science fiction became a household name everywhere, at the government level, at the international organizations level, or at the private sector. It became a buzzword, and I don't think it's a hype. And I don't think it's a sort of a trend which is going to go away. And I'll explain to you why. For example, from the private sector side, every single research shows that the market sort of share of the AI companies are growing exponentially, when within 3 to 5 years, we're going to reach hundreds of billions or even trillion market share, which is really big. Now, from the side of the governments, we see an accelerated effort of governments adopting national strategies related to artificial intelligence. Those are very serious documents adopted by governments and implemented through their budget allocations. So governments take this issue extremely seriously. We have over 45 governments right now, countries who adopted their national strategies, and some of them are extremely ambitious and with huge budget allocations as well. So this is a trend, this is going to continue, and this is certainly not a hype. Now, within the United Nations, United Nations created its its AI strategy as well, how to assist countries, especially in the developing world, to ensure that what we kind of sadly see currently, quite a significant global digital divide, to somehow manage this process, that this divide is not growing, and on the contrary, this applications, this technology is available to everyone, so that everyone will benefit from it rather than selecting few. Because what we don't want, certainly, and I think that everyone would share this, and ending up in a world where only selected few will sort of enjoy the benefits of everything and the rest of them will be left out. I don't know, maybe you've seen a movie called Elysium, when selected few sort of developed and went ahead, and yeah, so we don't want to live in a world like Elysium, basically. Now, so what we see is that on the level of government, on the level of private sector, on the level of international organizations, and accelerated investments into this field, and these investments are going to certainly pay off. Similarly, in academia, there are numerous academic research are also happening within the academic circles on artificial intelligence, whether this is technology related or whether it's related more how to govern this technology, ethical side of it, human rights side of it. So there's a really sort of accelerated movement within this field.
And continuing along that, I've watched several of your previous presentations. You outlined a fascinating array of both threats and then solutions, and I thought we'd just start with sort of the basket of threats that you've outlined in the past. You've talked about things, when we talk about artificial intelligence, things like very complicated forms of digital or cyber attacks, the extreme amount of political and fake news that can be generated using the AI tools. And then on the robotics side, you've talked about things like drones that can be maliciously used for purposes, assassinations, other wild ideas. Walk us through some of these threats that you're most concerned about with these technologies.
Sure. I mean, there are numerous threats associated with technology in general and with AI-related technology in particular as well. Look, we categorize this in sort of three main domains, and then there are many little subdomains within that as well, which are also very dangerous. But let's look at the sort of main domains.
Please.
Digital threats, number one. Basically, any cyber threat which we are experiencing right now are generated by human resources, so human beings, right? So-called hackers who can actually code some malicious codes and penetrate into systems. That's the present scenario, which is changing rapidly by employing AI type of tools, which are way more powerful than combination of any human beings, and can learn from its own mistakes, self-learn, and find loopholes into the systems in much more sophisticated way that human beings ever could. So therefore, accelerating the problem of the digital threats to a level which we've never really faced as a history of sort of humankind, put it this way. Therefore, that alone is an accelerated threat which requires immediate attention, and that's why what we are doing is conducting numerous sort of research on that field and empowering law enforcement agencies globally to see how these threats can be addressed, what are the latest threats, what are the technological developments, and how sort of employ any tools which would defend against that. Now let's look at the other type of category of this threat. These are more physical threats. On the physical side, I mean, there could be numerous applications within robotics or AI, but my favorite example is the combination of both. Let's say you take a drone, and the drone technology also is becoming sophisticated on a weekly basis. You see basically numerous very sophisticated drones out there which can fly higher, faster, longer, without detection and all sorts of, or become smaller as well. And then if you take that and combine it with AI application, for example, like face recognition, and on its own, face recognition is becoming more and more sophisticated and more advanced. you will have quite a deadly combination, a drone with a face recognition on it, which will be given a task to find, well, it could be used for individual harm, like with my own face and fly around The Hague to find me and do something bad to me. Or it could be tasked to do something with more discriminatory, like with the racial features or with ethnical features or other horrible things which could be employed. And the third level of threat, what we call it so-called political threats, these are the threats associated how AI can disrupt political processes, democratic processes, elections, or other things. And one of the vivid examples there could be employment of the so-called deep fakes. We all seen already sort of generated videos, fake videos, so-called deep fakes. Mm-hmm. And a few years ago, this seemed like a kind of a gimmick that some people just put it all together. So right now, what we see is that commercially available free applications, which can make quite an accurate deep fakes. And with a little bit of resources and a little more data, right now, it is absolutely possible to make an extremely accurate deep fake, which will be very difficult to see whether it's real or not, which really challenges the crisis of the truth. And that's really dangerous because as long as we exist as human beings, in every nation, every culture, there is a saying that I've seen it with my own eyes, which means that if I've seen it with my own eyes, it must be truth. And what deepfakes do is that challenges this whole perception that I've seen it with my own eyes may not be true anymore. And once this becomes more and more sophisticated in a way, so more and more clear, that can pose a serious problem to our daily lives, including political processes, including other things like we've sort of looked at some hypothetical scenarios of stock market manipulations or other type of sort of process manipulation. It doesn't need to be only the face fake video, it could be fake voice generations and many other things as well. So these are the major kind of the trends within the threats, and then there are, of course, many little subcategories within it too.
And you one of your presentations I've seen, you've outlined a fascinating use case for let's say a countermeasure against an extremely heinous crime, human trafficking. Can you walk us through a little bit of sort of the top line in that particular plan?
Sure. So there are many. I mean, I always say that if the AI was all bad, I mean, the simple thing would be that we would just have to issue an international ban, and we would not be worried about it. But fortunately, rather than unfortunately, I would still insist, is not the case. And the case is that we can get a lot of benefit from this technology on all different levels. Within the UN, we look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and how artificial intelligence can play a role in the fulfillment of these goals. And I think this is a big issue. We are running a specialized global movement, which is called AI for Good Summits, run out of Geneva, and we are founding members of this as well, where we test out numerous AI applications, how they can complement fulfillment of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now, on the primary issues, human trafficking or the abuse of children, for example, or sexual abuse of children online, this is something which we actually recently started specific programs on that with support of some United Nations member states. And we are empowering law enforcement agencies with the tools, AI tools, to help them detect and find solutions to these problems. For example, with what we have at hand here, Ira, is the extremely efficient and effective way of interpreting enormous amount of data. Right now, as human beings, we are accumulating, I would say on a sort of an hourly basis, enormous amount of data. Mm-hmm. it is projected that right now we have around 45 zettabytes of data globally accumulated, which is a humongous amount. It is the amount basically of every single word spoken by every single human being ever existed in the history of civilization. So that's how much data we have accumulated.
That's a lot of data.
That's a lot of data. But look, as a comparison, 10 years ago, by 2010, we had only 1 zettabyte. And by 2025, within 5 years, it is projected we're going to have 175 zettabyte data. That's as much data as if you put in the stack of DVDs and up to the moon 27 times. So that's a lot of stuff. And it is nearly impossible for a single human being or combination of human beings to make sense of such a data, to decipher it, and to come up with real solutions. So the same thing happens with the law enforcement. Law enforcement agencies have some data available to them to solve cases, and in most of the cases they have a lot of this data, and they do need employment of sophisticated tools which are going to help them to find solutions. Similarly, with cases like human trafficking or the abuse of children online, what is really important is to identify victims. And identification of the victims, whether you do it manually, like law enforcement officers going through all the pictures, or you employ an AI tool, which is going to interpret this data much faster and much more efficiently, I mean, you can see the which would outweigh the other. So what my prediction in that case is that not only that we need these tools, within 3 to 5 years, we will be absolutely dependent on the tools. Any organization or any agency which won't be employing these tools will be really sort of living in a stone age.
And along the lines, you mentioned, you work with agencies like Interpol for sort of the enforcement part of this, and obviously the example of sort of the physical threat of the UAVs. This is more of a science fiction question, but your thoughts on the robotic side of things in terms of countermeasures. Obviously, you've been involved in cleaning up and dealing with chemical weapons. Robots, obviously good role in that, and nuclear spills and all sorts of other stuff. You see a role for robots in enforcement at some time? I don't know if that's a counter drone to the assassination drones or RoboCop type stuff, but or is that just a little?
Look, I mean, it really does depend. That what I can see and what I can tell you is that in the foreseeable future, 5 to 10 years time, or maybe a little longer, we're going to have a kind of a coexistence with machines like artificial intelligence tools, or robotic tools as well. I'm absolutely not one of those people who are terrified about robots taking over or we becoming slaves of the machines. Although with a pinch of salt, we always need to be mindful what we are creating so that it's not going to backfire. And what I'm more concerned about is some of these immediate threats, like the issues related to privacy, issues related to sort of human rights in general, that how to ensure that we are not creating something which is not sort of bringing benefits to us, but on the contrary creates problems. So what we don't want to see is that discriminatory use of artificial intelligence. For example, vision of our center and my personal vision, and I keep repeating this, is the world where we can see crimes are prevented, investigated, and prosecuted, and offenders are deterred and rehabilitated through the criminal justice systems more effectively and efficiently with the use of technology like AI, robotics, or related technology, but, and I underline that, in a manner that does not erode human rights, deepen inequality, or exacerbate discrimination. And I think this is really important, because any application which would do that, we should not be employing.
Yeah. On the AI for good theme, obviously you have a major portfolio that we're just talking about, but you also are actively involved in identifying these various AI solutions for the United Nations sustainability goals, which is a broad swath from health to food to clean water and so forth. Talk about some of the areas that you're most interested in terms of these AI solutions for the SDG.
Right. I mean, from the UN perspective itself, we are looking at SDGs in general on all 17 United Nations goals, and these are big and very ambitious goals, as you know. Ira, we're talking about things like no poverty, zero hunger, or things like quality education for everyone, or climate action, and things like peace, justice, and strong institutions. SDG 16, which is the peace, justice, and strong institutions, is closer, obviously, to the mandate of UNICRI itself in our center. And we are looking at all the sub-goals or so-called targets and indicators of this. In the SDG 16, there is a specialized sort of a target how to ensure that children are not abused, and our programs which are aimed how AI can support that are one of the closest programs to my heart personally, and to anyone. Ira, if you would see the numbers, what is happening in that field, this is really horrifying numbers, because the abuse of children has increased dramatically, whether it's physical or online. And during this COVID times, it has accelerated as well. A lot of children have access to internet. A lot of children spend a lot of time at home as well, and perpetrators have accelerated the ways how to get to children and how to employ technology as well. And this became a massive issue globally. So what we are doing is, as I've mentioned, is that we are empowering relevant agencies with latest technological tools to fight that, because otherwise no country on its own, or no law enforcement agency or a single agent, would be able to do so. Therefore, we see fascinating applications, but what we need is the more sort of a massive global movement accelerating the understanding of this issue, how serious this is, because today's children are born into internet, are born into the smartphones and technologies. Their parents have nowhere near understanding of the use of these technologies at all, so nowhere near ability to even control how children are using, and not only controlling, but what I'm talking about is how to safeguard them online. So we are in a very uncharted territories right now in terms of the children using internet and their safety online as well. And in some countries, in some places, there are certain safeguards, but if you take it on a global scale, this situation is very serious and very alarming as well.
It keeps me up at night when I think of my children and their sort of the whole new frontier that they have. But yeah, that's another topic. Talk just for a couple minutes, if you would, about the UNICRI guiding principles that you follow. I mean, you mentioned some of the things in terms of, pushing aside technologies that discriminate and so forth, and see you as good, me bad, and let's talk about some of the what goes into that process as well, in terms of vetting the different tools that you either decide to not use or use in your daily work.
Yeah. So look, I mean, there are a lot of discussions on artificial intelligence in general, and there are many sort of polarized views, including there are people who are arguing that certain type of AI applications should be banned before we have a solutions. And I do agree that, as I said before, we should never employ any application which would have a potential harm to the human rights, to the human beings. Our guiding principles are that, as I mentioned before, but I'm happy to sort of more elaborate, is that these tools are used, but to adhere and with general principles such as respect of human rights, democracy, justice and the rule of law. And what is required to meet these principles is the development and deployment and use of AI, which should seek to adapt the requirements of fairness, accountability, transparency, and explainability throughout the entire life cycle of the system. So what we are doing actually at our center is that we are developing a specialized toolkit, and that's a joint endeavor together with Interpol and European Commission. And this toolkit will assist law enforcement agencies to use AI applications with taking into account of all of this, which I mentioned, basically all these requirements of the fairness, accountability, transparency, explainability throughout the life cycle, and with the full respects of the human rights. It's a very sort of a tedious process. It does require involvement of sort of a multi-stakeholder movement, countries, academia, private sector, civil society, and others. But at the same time, it is really needed process, because end of the day, what we need is the technology which solves problems, but at the same time, technology which is trusted by public. What we don't want is that technology being used and public does not trust it, or public is suspicious of that. Then we will have a backlash, and that's when we will have banning of technologies which actually potentially could solve our problems, could make our lives easier, right? So when, for example, your child is missing in a crowded place, you do want to use technology to find your child immediately. But at the same time, what you don't want is that the same technology is used to discriminate someone or to sort of support oppressive regimes.
Yep, outstanding.
So that's our principles.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate elaborating further on that. It's extremely important to put that out there alongside all the exciting technologies, that there is this guiding set of principles. So I appreciate that. Irakli, coming back to you, obviously you've had an amazing career to date. You have met people from all corners of the world, governments, non-government organizations, think tanks, private industry. Take a little time, if you would, at this point, just to mention the mentors, the influencers, some of the folks along the way that have been really inspirational to you in keeping you on this journey, on this path, keeping you focused and interested in it. And you know, the type of people, if it wasn't for them, Irakli Beridze would be practicing law or doing something else than what you're doing now.
Look, I mean, I've met many people, obviously, and I've met global leaders within the governments or within the private sector, and really fascinating people. Obviously, every single of such a meeting, every single interaction is teaching me something along the way. It is empowering me, and not only that, encourages me to do more, to invest more of my time and effort to make our life, our planet, our existence sort of a safer and better and more sort of a quality place to be. If I would want to probably single out anyone, is I was growing up in a place where a lot of things were not allowed, and this was Soviet Union, one of the most oppressive regimes of our lifetimes, probably you could have ever imagined. And I had parents, both my mother and father, who were not members of the Communist Party, and they were teaching me a free thinking. They were teaching me that every decision you make should be on your own free will. You are a free person who is able to make decisions, who is able to think freely. You are born in a sort of a free world. To me, those are the influences which sort of later on helped me to go without fear, overcoming a lot of obstacles along the way, but to sort of come out in the world and try to put extra brick, extra stone towards better future, better life, or better thing. Obviously, what we are doing is that what I'm doing personally is I'm contributing. I'm one of those people who trying to do a little bit along the way, which would sort of later on make this bigger picture better for everybody.
It's a beautiful message, and I appreciate you you mentioning your parents in that capacity. So, really wonderful. Irakli, it's been a great time talking to you. It's an amazing portfolio. Really, I mean, you have a lot on your desk, and really wishing you the best with all of it. For anyone well, actually, I have one other question for you. I just reminded you.
Sure.
While I have you, we get a lot of the younger audience now listening to these shows, watching these shows. They're going to hear your story and they'll be like, "Wow, I want to do this. I want to be the next Irakli Beridze. I want to really contribute in this sort of the larger scale." Take a couple minutes, just some recommendations for the younger audience, the high school senior that's trying to figure out what they want to do when they get to college, or the freshman in college. Is it about law? Should they be studying international relations? What would you suggest to somebody that comes along and says, "I want to do I want to replace you in 20 years"?
Look, I don't know that. I have a 14-year-old daughter who asks me this question along the way, and my message is something like what my parents were also teaching me. Think freely. Think about what is that you can actually do to contribute. What is that? What fascinates you? Because at the end of the day, what you're doing is that you need to be fascinated about. You need to be really interested about. You cannot force it, right? You cannot just make decisions forcefully or because you want to copy anyone. So I think what will be really required in the future is creativity, is those type of skills where machines are not going to replace us that easily. Those communication skills. I always encourage my children to go out and talk to people, because what I see now, a major trend among sort of young generation, Gen Z generation, or even younger, that they talk to friends, even they sitting across the table and they messaging to each other instead of physically talking. And I want to encourage them, talk to each other, be communicative, express yourself. I think those are amazing skills which we would need it in the future if we want to remain as human beings as we are. Yeah. Now, as far as the studies, I think, any kind of data interpretation, whether it's in the social field or in technical field, will be really important in the future. I was giving an example about this 175 zettabyte by 2025, and probably by 2030 or so, we're going to have 500,000 zettabyte of data available to us, which would need to be interpreted, which needs to be deciphered, which need to be made sense to, and something that we can be using for good. So anyone who would be able to properly, efficiently, and fast interpret this amount of data with employment of the tools would certainly be in a position to sort of change the world for good, and come up with solutions which is going to eradicate diseases, which is going to come up with a better economic models for all of us to enjoy the fruits of this life, to come up with solutions related to poverty. For example, in this time, we still have places in the world where food shortages are there and poverty is in place. So we do need to come up with these solutions. We do need to come up with solutions related to the climate crisis, for example, because this climate crisis is accelerating. Whether we will have a little bit of a downtime with the COVID or not, the situation is still in a critical point where we would need to be addressing this more with new tools and with new understanding. Similarly, issues related to the security and the new threats and emerging threats, which I've been mentioning, this is not going to stop overnight. So anyone who would come up with solutions to address these challenges and these threats would certainly be in a position to actually do things which would fascinate them in the first place, and of course will benefit all of us.
Outstanding, outstanding. Fascinating stuff. As I said, wishing you the best with all of this portfolio. For everybody that's going to be listening to this episode on the podcast or watching on the YouTube channel, you've been spending time with Irakli Beridze, head of the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Robotics at the United Nations Interregional Crime and Justice Research Institute in The Hague, looking to create a safer, more secure, sustainable world for us. Irakli, I want to thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge with us. Thank you for everything you're doing there. And as we say on the show, thank you for helping to create a better tomorrow for all of us. It's extremely inspiring listening to you.
Thank you, Ira, and it's my pleasure to be with you today. And thanks to the audience for listening.